April 20, 1889, a spring day in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn. No one could have guessed that a baby born that day, Adolf Hitler, would one day plunge the world into chaos. Young Adolf was a strange child, filled with dreams that didn't seem to belong to a boy his age. His father, a domineering figure, had high expectations, but Adolf resented authority, often locking himself in his room to escape his father's wrath. But Adolf had a secret longing, to become a great painter. He idolized artists, their skill, their fame, and he believed, naively, that he could become one of them. Year after year, he painted, convinced of his genius. Yet, he was blind to his own mediocrity. When he finally gathered the courage to apply to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, he was devastated by rejection. Not once, but twice. His paintings were called unworthy, his dream crushed. This rejection would become a poison, seeping into his soul, feeding a growing bitterness. His days soon turned into dark nights in Vienna's streets, where he was homeless, penniless, and stewing in resentment. Hitler blamed everyone but himself, feeling cheated by society. In Vienna's alleys, he heard the whispers of anti-Semitism and conspiracies, and they took root in his wounded heart. These seeds would one day bear terrible fruit. 1914, the world was erupting into flames. World War I had begun, and Hitler found his chance to escape the gutter. With fierce enthusiasm, he enlisted, seeing himself as a soldier of destiny. War transformed him. In the brutal trenches of Belgium and France, he witnessed unspeakable horrors. Friends torn apart by shrapnel, poison gas burning his lungs, endless mud and blood. Yet, he thrived in chaos, his spirit hardened by suffering. Decorated for bravery, Hitler believed he was meant for something greater. Then came the news that shattered him, Germany's surrender. He was recovering in a hospital, his vision blurred from a gas attack, when he learned that his homeland had fallen, defeated and humiliated. Hitler was consumed with anger, believing that Germany hadn't been defeated on the battlefield, but betrayed from within by politicians, by the weak, and by those he despised most, Jews and Marxists. Returning to a broken Germany, Hitler found a nation on its knees. Inflation made money worthless, unemployment soared, people were starving. The streets were filled with riots and protests. In the midst of this chaos, Hitler discovered a small, radical political group, the German Workers' Party. He was drawn to their ideas, but his gift for oratory quickly set him apart. He joined the party, and soon transformed it into his own instrument, rebranding it as the Nazi Party. His speeches were mesmerizing. He captivated crowds with his fierce eyes, his booming voice, his impassioned promises of a restored Germany, and, most dangerously, his message of hate. In 1923, Hitler attempted a daring coup, known as the Beer Hall Putsch, to seize power by force. But it failed, and he was arrested. Imprisoned, he had time to plan and to write. In his book Mein Kampf, Hitler laid out his twisted vision for Germany's future, including a horrifying prophecy for the Jews. It should have been a warning, but instead, it became a manifesto for his followers. By the time he was released, Hitler had a loyal following. In the shadow of economic ruin and political instability, the German people saw him as a savior. His Nazi party grew, and in 1933, he was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Once in power, he moved quickly, eliminating his rivals, seizing total control, and establishing a brutal dictatorship. He became the Führer, the supreme leader of a dark, new Germany. With Germany in his iron grip, Hitler was ready to unleash his ambitions on the world. First, he began rebuilding the military, directly violating the Treaty of Versailles. Then he turned to expansion, annexing Austria and seizing Czechoslovakia. His moves were bold and terrifying, but other countries hesitated, fearing another world war. Hitler mistook their caution for weakness. In 1939, he ordered the invasion of Poland. Within days, Europe was at war once more. Blitzkrieg, the lightning war, became his tactic. German forces swept through Europe with shocking speed and brutality, crushing armies and seizing nations. France fell in a matter of weeks. Britain was bombed relentlessly. Hitler's forces seemed unstoppable. Behind the front lines, Hitler's regime began executing its most sinister plan. He aimed not just to conquer lands but to reshape humanity itself. In secret, concentration camps sprang up across German-occupied territories. First, they detained Hitler's political enemies. Then, they became death factories, where millions of Jews, Romani, Slavs, disabled individuals, and countless others were systematically murdered in what became known as the Holocaust. In horrifying detail, Hitler's final solution began. Families were torn apart, people were transported in cattle cars, starved, tortured, and executed in gas chambers. The world was unaware of the full scale of this genocide, but rumors were beginning to leak. And while his armies continued their advance, Hitler watched Europe burn, deluded with dreams of a 1,000-year Reich. Hitler's confidence would be his undoing. In 1941, he made a fatal decision, ordering an invasion of the Soviet Union. Despite warnings of Russia's brutal winter and stretched resources, he believed his armies were invincible. But as winter set in, German forces froze, starved, and died in the thousands. By 1944, the tide had turned. The Allies were advancing from the west, while the Soviets pushed in from the east. Hitler's empire was collapsing. April 1945, Berlin was under siege. The Führer, now a shadow of his former self, hid in his bunker beneath the city. Paranoid and delusional, he refused to surrender. Instead, he raged against his generals, accusing them of betrayal. Finally, as Soviet forces closed in, Hitler made his last, twisted choice. On April 30th, he took his own life. Hours later, Berlin fell, and the war in Europe was effectively over. In the aftermath, the world discovered the extent of Hitler's atrocities. Germany lay in ruins, cities reduced to rubble, and millions were dead. Hitler's legacy was one of unmatched cruelty, a testament to the horrors that unchecked power and hatred can unleash. Today, he is remembered as a stark warning of how one man's ambitions, hatred, and influence can drive an entire nation into darkness. This tale of ambition turned monstrous, of a rise built on lies and a fall into madness, is one the world can never afford to forget. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and press bell icon for more details.